There's a contradiction with the heart of modern pop culture that grows more and more the way powerful women are written into stories. It's not a contradiction of weak writing or shallow characterization, but of cultural discomfort and unease of what strength is allowed to look like when it comes from a woman. Again and again, across games, comics, and film, female characters are permitted power only under increasingly narrow aesthetic and moral conditions. I call this contradiction the Supergirl paradox. The idea that a woman can be competent, intelligent, emotionally complex, and narratively central, yet her beauty or sexuality becomes the primary reason her legitimacy is questioned. We live in a cultural moment that insists that it wants strong female characters, yet that desire is conditional. Strength must be carefully framed. Confidence must be visually restrained. Power must be justified itself. And beauty, once neutral, even aspirational, has been recoded as suspect. Sexuality is no longer contextual. It is presumed ideological, as if attraction itself invalidates meaning. This framing borrows language from legitimate female critiques. Concepts like objectification and male gaze emerged to explain how women were historically reduced or denied autonomy. These tools were necessary, but over time they've hardened into doctrine. Instead of asking how a character is framed, the conversation increasingly asks whether she should be allowed to look that way at all. That shift replaces one restriction with another. Where women were once told they were existed to be looked at, and now are told how they look must prove they're not looked at incorrectly. Both frameworks center surveillance, both narrow expression, both fail to trust women, fictional or real, with contradiction. I'm speaking as a male gamer and a pop culture critique. That positionality is often treated as disqualifying, but criticism does not become invalid based on who articulates it. It becomes invalid when it ignores narrative context, audience agency, and cultural history. When those elements are taken seriously, the paradox becomes impossible to dismiss. And to prove this paradox, it is not enough to point out isolated controversies. We must examine characters that have made different aesthetic choices and show that every path is punished. Beauty is punished. Modesty is punished. Sexuality is punished. Restraint is punished. The problem is not presentation. It is the discomfort with female contradiction. When Lara Croft emerged in the 1990s, she was not merely a new video game character. She was a challenge to the medium's assumption. At the time, video games were still dismissed as juvenile. Women, when present, were prizes, victims, or background flavor. Lara Croft was none of those. Lara was alone. That detail was foundational, as she explored ancient ruins without a squad, a mentor, or romantically. Her motivations were curiosity, obsession, and ambition, traits long coded as masculine. She did not save the world out of moral duty. She pursued knowledge for its own sake. Her competence was not softened by emotional caretaking. Early Tomb Raider narratives did not portray Lara as a warm or universally admirable. She was emotionally distant, wealthy, privileged, and unapologetic. Her independence came with isolation. These traits gave her texture. Her agency was not granted. It was exercised through decision-making and consequence. Yet, discourse quickly collapsed around her body. Her exaggerated proportions, partially a product of early 3D modeling design, became the shorthand for everything critics believe gaming represents: indulgent, immaturity, and male fantasy. Her narrative role was overshadowed by her silhouette. This was the first clear articulation of the Supergirl paradox in gaming form. Lara's competency was treated as a conditional. If she was attractive, her strength must be artificial. Beauty was framed as a contamination rather than coexistence. As Lara's popularity grew, discomfort intensified. Women embraced her as an aspirational figure, but were dismissed as eternalizing misogyny. Their agency as players was overwritten by ideologically certainty. The assumption was the attraction erased autonomy. Later reboots attempted to resolve this tension by grounding Lara in pain, injury, fear, and vulnerability that replaced the glamour. These versions were well written, but they revealed the cultural correction. Female strength now required suffering. To be taken seriously, beauty alone was no longer enough. And people's arguments have always centered around the idea that she was always designed for male gaze. Her real strength was never there. But meaning is not defined by its creators. Lara became an icon because of the players, because of women, found autonomy and confidence and aspiration to be like her. Denying that experience is retroactively not a critique, but an erasure of her impact. And then, when Bayonetta arrived in 2009, Gaming culture had already absorbed the anxiety about gender and legitimacy. Bayonetta did not attempt to reassure anyone. She exaggerated every discomfort. Bayonetta's sexuality is not accidental. It is theatrical, performative, and deeply intentional. But it is also narratively earned. She begins fragmented, her memories incomplete, her identity unstable. Her confidence is not naivete, it is a reclamation. As Bayonetta uncovers her past, her control over her body and presentation becomes an assertion of selfhood. She does not ask permission to be seen. She does not apologize for pleasure. Crucially, the narrative never punishes her. This alone makes her transgressive. In much of pop culture, sexual women must be humbled, redeemed, or destroyed. Bayonetta remains powerful, humorous, and dominant without moral correction. Critics struggle to characterize her. Some insist she must be satire. Others reject her outright, arguing that self-awareness does not negate objectification. But objectification is not mere visibility, it is reduction. Bayonetta is never reduced. She initiates the action. She controls the tone. She dictates the outcomes. The discomfort surrounding Bayonetta is not about harm. It is about control. She's a sexual person without shame and is powerful with justification. And that combination remains deeply unsettling to those who have lived their life with the idea that any woman who flaunts her sexuality and wants to do it must be under some kind of metaphorical, parental, patriarchal system, because no self-respecting, quote, woman would want to do this. Then we fast forward about 12 years later, and we have the introduction of Eve from Stellar Blade, which marks the most modern evolution of the Supergirl paradox, and one of its most revealing forms. Eve was condemned before her story was even engaged with. Her design alone became the argument. This preemptive judgment ignored the actual narrative of Stellar Blade, which is not a power fantasy, but a tragedy about indoctrination, bodily sacrifice, and existential horror. Eve is not free. She is engineered. Raised by the Mother Sphere, she is taught obedience, efficiency, and devotion to a cause that she does not yet understand. Her beauty is not indulgent. It is part of her construction. Her body is a tool designed to inspire hope while expended without hesitation, as they refer to as angels. As the story unfolds, Eve witnesses devastation, betrayal, and the horrifying truth about her origins. She learns that she and others like her are disposable. Her humanity is denied by the very system that created her. Her journey is one of awakening. Eve must confront the reality that her purpose was never liberation, but purely sacrifice. She suffers physiologically and psychologically when it questions her identity, her worth, and her right to exist beyond function. That is, she attractive does not soften this story, it sharpens it. Her beauty becomes part of the horror, a reminder that even perfection can be exploited. And the idea that this is being brought down to Eve reinforcing unrealistic beauty standards completely invalidates everything else about the character. Her story is explicitly about the violence of imposed perfection. To reduce her to an appearance alone is to repeat the very same dehumanization that the narrative condemns and what has been condemned for generations. And speaking of generations, let's go back a little bit to two iconic female characters in comic book history who have recently been added to one of the more popular games in Marvel Rivals, in Emma Frost and Rogue. Emma Frost did not earn authority by becoming less sexual. She earned it through failure, consequence, and choice. Introduced into the comics as a villain, she wielded intelligence and manipulation long before she was ever trusted. Her relationship with Scott Summers profoundly reshaped her public perception. With Scott, she became more emotionally exposed. Her vulnerability humanized her in the eyes of the audiences who had previously dismissed her as cold and predatory. Yet this shift came at a cost. Emma's sexuality was reframed as acceptable only when tethered to the emotional suffering and romantic devotion. Her authority became palatable once it was softened by love. Rogue offers the inverse. Her power makes her intimacy dangerous. Touch equals loss, desire equals harm, and her relationship with Gambit became iconic precisely because it was restrained. The Rogue sexuality was legitimately through denial. Her longing was tragic and not indulgent. Audiences accepted her sensuality only because it was painful. Together, Emma and Rogue reveals a pattern. Female sexuality is permitted only when punished, restrained, or emotionally costed. And that has been the case for many generations of female heroes in both DC and Marvel for decades. And no character proves the Supergirl paradox more conclusively than Supergirl and Power Girl. Unlike Clark Kent, both women remember Krypton. They remember its culture, its people, its destruction. Their grief is not abstract, it is lived memory. They carry survivor's guilt Clark never experienced. Supergirl internalizes the loss. She is earnest, compassionate, and emotionally raw. She is scrutinized relentlessly. Too innocent, she is childish. Too confident, she panders. Too beautiful, she lacks depth. Power Girl externalizes the same trauma differently. She embraces confidence, sexuality, and physical presence. Fans openly have discussed the casting of like Sydney Sweeney, often citing that this would, quote, break records because of her attractiveness. And yet Power Girl is also punished. Male critics reduce her to a spectacle. Female critics reduce her to being regressive. One is too safe, the other is too much. Both are unacceptable, both are scrutinized, both are not legitimacy for opposite choice. This is the paradox made undeniable. There's no correct way for a female character to be both powerful and attractive. Now I want to close off with this. If empowerment requires limitation, it is not empowerment. If critique cannot tolerate contradiction, it is not analysis. If feminism polices women's bodies, fictional or real, it has learned the wrong lesson. Attraction is not ownership, desire is not domination, and fantasy does not erase respect unless we insist it must. Some women want realism, some women want fantasy, some want beauty, some want restraint. None of these three invalidate the others. Supergirl paradox exists because we keep asking the wrong question. The question is not who is this for, the question is who is allowed to exist without apology. Until then, this debate will resolve never, but simply repeat until the dawn of time, and that's what truly makes this a paradox. GG's, guys.
Stop what you're doing!